Welcome, everyone. My name is Lee Semplis, and I'm a member of the Encore Network. We're a coalition of leaders who champion the civic, social, and economic contributions of people over the age of 50 by creating a sense of community, providing learning experiences, and inspiring action to transform the Encore stage of life. And we're so glad to have you all with us today in this community and participating in the webinar. Please note that we are recording this session, and in a few days, we'll send you a link to all that have registered to the recording. Our focus today will be on how we can lead in the efforts to reframe aging and end ageism. And we have with us Janine Vanderberg. Many of you know Janine from her work at the Encore Network, as she has served as the board chair for the past 3 years. Janine is also the founder and current senior strategist for Changing the Narrative, which is a leading U.S. campaign to end ageism. She founded its award-winning age-friendly workplace initiative, which won a Metro Vision Award from the Denver Regional Council of Governments, which calls the attention to the business case for providing older workers and building intergenerational teams. She's certified by Frameworks Institute as a trainer in reframing aging. Janine believes that changing the stories we tell about ourselves and allow others to tell about us can be a powerful component of creating social change. So at this point in the program, I'd like to turn it over to Janine to share more of her thoughts about reframing aging and ending ageism.
Lee, thanks so much. And all of you, it is so nice to be here with so many Encore Network colleagues and other friends as well from across, across the world who believe, as I do, that the opportunities for older adults to contribute to our communities, to our society is so profound, and that we cannot allow ageism to get in the way. So what I'm going to do today, and I'm going to start by sharing a screen, we're going to go ahead and talk about what we are going to cover today. And it is, we're going to start first with talking about why is it important for all of us to reframe aging. We're going to talk a little bit about why are we looking to those of you in the room as potential leaders in this movement. Then we'll get to some what I like to call the ABCs of leading the way in reframing aging. It's really important to me, and one of the key principles of changing the narrative is really co-creation, that we have some ideas, and a lot of the ideas that we share are based on research and evidence, but some of the best ideas actually come from all of you. So we will have a breakout room where we will be soliciting all of your ideas. And please, please be that person who joins the breakout room and shares your ideas with others. And don't leave some poor, lonely person staring at themselves on the screen. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions and moving forward. But if there are questions that you have, feel free to put them in the chat along the way. And if we can't get to them towards the end of this, we'll go ahead and make sure that we get the questions and answers to you. You'll also get a copy of this deck that I am presenting. You'll notice at some points during the deck, there are hyperlink blue links. All of those link to the underlying research or articles. So you'll get it in a format where you can click through and look at the research behind it. And I'll also be sending you our guidelines to age-inclusive communications. So the desired outcome of this is I hope that some of you are inspired and motivated to actually lead in this movement, because I truly believe that people affiliated with the Encore Network and others who are working directly with people age 50 and over, or in some cases, I know age 40 and over, are in the best position to lead this movement. So a few agreements as we get started. One, I call the no shame rule. So as we go through some of the principles of reframing aging, some of you may say, as I've said to myself in the past, ooh, I said that yesterday, and that's all right. The idea here is what the poet Maya Angelou once said, when we know better, we do better. So the idea is that we can all know better together. I will be citing some of the research from Frameworks Institute. The research is the research. So it's the research that Frameworks did is based on really large sample sizes across the United States. It may not resonate with what you yourself personally believe, but what's important is that all of us know when we are communicating in some way to the public about aging and about ageism, that the Frameworks research has really provided a path that actually reduces ageism. On the other hand, you get to choose what you use. If some of the stuff you just say, this isn't going to work for me, you get to choose. And most importantly, our agreement is please share what you learn. If you see opportunities to share, I truly believe that both in the realm of ageism and in the realm of thinking differently about aging, the Encore Network and all of you who are in some way or another working in an Encore space truly are the leaders in building a movement around this. So the more that we share what we learn, the bigger the movement impact. So we're going to start with why should we reframe aging? And part of it is we know that the stories that are told about getting older are often dreadful, right? We know, and there's been a lot of conversation lately about gendered ageism. Women especially are pushed out of the way, but we know that this happens to all genders. We know, there's been so much talk in this political sphere of the gerontocracy, and older politicians should retire. And we know very often the benefits of the wisdom and experience of older people are pushed out of the way. So what the idea of reframing aging is that we want to change the stories, not that we tell about ourselves, but also that others tell about us, and stories that are out in the public sphere about aging. One of the most compelling reasons to me to do this is what is known from the research of Dr. Becca Levy of the Yale School of Public Health. We know that when we are, and what her research has shown, is when we are able to think positively about aging, something that Dr. Levy calls age-positive beliefs, here are the kind of results that happen. We will have increased longevity, on average 7.5 years, improved health, greater ability to recover from illness or injury, reduced likelihood of dementia by almost half, even if we have the genetic marker for Alzheimer's. And research that Dr. Levy just released in the last few weeks shows that not only having age-positive beliefs improves our memory, but there's also some evidence that having age-positive beliefs can reverse some mild cognitive decline. So these are really powerful reasons for all of us to cultivate these positive beliefs, not only in ourselves, but among those we work with about aging. So unfortunately, though, what kind of gets in the way of that is ageism. We are so surrounded by the kind of beliefs and the narrative and the stories that aging is all bad, and that older people are just awful. So ageism, this is how the World Health Organization describes it. It's prejudice, how people feel. So it could be simply someone saying, you know what, I just don't like older people. It's stereotyping, how we think. So those kind of stereotypes, older people are digitally incompetent. Older people don't want to learn new things. Those are all examples of stereotypes. And then where ageism becomes especially troublesome is when that prejudice and stereotypes actually results in discrimination in our own actions. Now, it's important for us to note, and this is one of the things we always talk about at Changing the Narrative, that ageism is simply based on age. So ageism can be directed against younger people as well. If any of us, in an attempt to elevate ourselves as older people, are going around saying things like entitled millennials or dissing Gen Z for spending too much time on TikTok, whatever it is, we are ourselves guilty of ageism. For the purposes of this presentation, though, what we are talking about is ageism directed against older people. So just for a moment, here's where I'm going to ask each of you, just for a second, to go in the chat. Talking about stereotypes, what are 2 stereotypes that you believe the general public has about aging and older people? And Lee, I'm wondering if I can ask you to read whatever comes up in the chat. 2 stereotypes that the general public has about aging and older people. This is your opportunity for interaction, friends.
Older people are so cute.
Oh,
Weak,
Visceral reaction. Okay.
Older people are closed-minded.
Mhm.
They all have memory issues. Older people have cognitive decline. They're conservative. Older people are mean. They are invisible, and their agency is limited or dismissed.
Okay, we can stop right now. Um, so those exactly. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. And that is the storyline that very often those of us who are in the Encore movement, who are trying to end ageism, are encountering all the time, that we have these stereotypes about what older people are. And one of the things that I think is really important, and actually George Takei, of the Star Wars guy, once said that I think is really important. Stereotypes aren't bad because they're not always true, or because they're always true. Stereotypes are bad because there are times they basically prevent us from looking at people as individuals. So if you know one person, your Uncle Harry, and he can't use his smartphone, that does not mean that all older people are digitally incompetent. If your Aunt Marielle is a conservative voter, that doesn't mean that all people age 50 and over are conservative voters and should be treated that way. So those are some things that I think are important to understand about stereotypes and how they can harm us. What Frameworks Institute found, so Frameworks Institute is a strategic communications firm, but all they do is study social issues, right? They're not figuring out how to market the next detergent. They look at patterns of thinking that the general public has about certain social issues. And what they do is they study ways that we can move through those patterns of thinking in our own communications to lead to more productive outcomes. When they, as the result of many leading national aging organizations, researched how the general public thought about aging, they found these three common patterns of thinking that I think are relevant to us who are part of the Encore movement. The first was the idealized version of aging versus the perceived reality. The idealized version is, they're in pharmaceutical ads, right? We're sitting on the beach, we're holding our sparkly something, life is good. But that really is drowned out by the stronger and dominant narrative that were all of the things that Lee read out from your chat. The perceived reality is that aging is all a time of decline, deterioration, dependence, depression. Basically, it is all awful. There is a very strong theme that Frameworks found of us versus them. Now we're seeing a lot of us versus them in recent political discourse. The gerontocracy, move out of the way, let younger people take over is an example. It is also, and we've heard this in the Encore movement, well, it's time for us to, quote, step aside so that younger people can, take the leadership. And I want you to think about the reality of how that plays out in the workforce when in the United States, we have 10 million unfilled jobs, and most states in the United States have 2 unfilled jobs for every person looking. So the idea that older people should step out of the workforce is one of those tropes that we need to abandon, but that's how strong the us versus them thinking is. The third pattern of thinking that I think is relevant for our purposes today is that strong kind of American individualistic culture. In other words, if you're not doing well in any way, it's kind of your fault as an individual. So you didn't save enough money, you didn't eat the right food, you didn't exercise enough. In a workforce setting, well, maybe you just didn't sharpen your skills. And we need to think about that in the social context of who has access to things, and also in terms of sharpening our skills, knowing that most surveys that have been done show that employers tend not to invest in older workers out of a misconception that they're going to leave soon. And so they put most of their professional development money towards younger workers, right? So those are some of the research findings that affect our jobs. So I want to talk a little bit about how ageism shows up in different places, because too often we just think it's a question of bad actors. But we also know that very often we can internalize ageism. And one of the things that the research actually shows is the older we are, and this is going to seem counterintuitive, the older we are, we become more ageist. And one of the reasons for that is we've absorbed ageist messages from our culture that younger is better for longer than someone is younger. So it may show up in you like this, and there may be other ways where you start thinking, well, I kind of like to learn that, but I think I'm too old to learn that. Or, think of Encore. Well, I'd like to do something different, but maybe I'm too old to start, right? Or there's, one of my personal favorites, I'm having a senior moment. When I started changing the narrative 5 years ago, and my husband was running around saying, I'm having a senior moment, I had to remind him that when we were in our 20s and first married, he lost his car keys. We have 2 millennial daughters who lose their car keys. I really think it's a Vanderburg thing and not a, quote, senior moment thing. But this is the extent to which language and messages, right, get locked into our thinking. We also know that interpersonal ageism is very real, and we can't dismiss it. I know that many of you on this call are in the business of encouraging and motivating Encore seekers and people who are looking for their what's next or the next stage and buoying them up. But it would be a mistake for any of us to ignore the fact that interpersonal ageism is real. So it can be in a workforce where someone is dismissed and not given the opportunity to learn the new software, and then basically says, well, we need to get rid of George because he's not digitally competent, right? We know this takes place in hiring. We're not going to hire this person. He's in his 60s and he won't stick around. I hear a lot around this third bullet from people I talk to of the subtle or not so subtle pressure when people start stopping at your cubicle and saying, so when are you going to retire anyway? Are you still working, really? And then we know, there was the very famous case in Florida where an older woman was dismissed from TV. Our viewers want someone younger. So those are all examples of interpersonal ageism. But we also know that ageism gets embedded, right, in our institutions and our policies, and that's where it becomes systemic. So it may reside in ourselves. It's because of ageist messages. It happens between people. But we also know it's baked into our institutions. So I find it fascinating that we have age discrimination laws. We have a federal age discrimination law in the United States, but even though its language is identical to language in laws against other forms of discrimination, the enforcement is weaker. As a result of Supreme Court decision, the burden of proof to prove age discrimination is higher than it is for other forms of discrimination. And some courts have ruled that the Age Discrimination in Employment Act does not apply in the hiring process, right? So that's an example of institutional ageism. We have things like, so age discrimination is technically banned, but it is not illegal to ask people for their age or graduation dates. And for most of us, our high school graduation date is approximate for our age, right? Another example. And we also know, and this is research from AARP Research and others, that very often employers provide very limited professional development opportunities for older adults in their workplaces. And we also know on kind of a federal level, on a state level, on a regional level, and I think this is very applicable to the Encore network, a lot of dollars are set aside for workforce development, but very rarely are any percentage of those allocated to programs like Encore programs that actually prepare people age 50 and over for new jobs, new skills, and that kind of thing. So those are all areas where ageism shows up in institutional, and I'm hoping this is starting to kind of trigger in you. What are some ideas that you could lead in any of these efforts to change these circumstances? So how likely is it that your clients or constituents have experienced ageism at work? Well, fairly likely. I thought this study from Resume Builder last year was fascinating. Interviewing 800 hiring managers across the United States, even though workplace age discrimination is illegal, 38% of those hiring managers admitted to screening out applications based on age, and 44% of them said, well, applicants shouldn't put their graduation dates on. Well, except most online applications require you to do that, right? AARP research last year, 93% of people said workplace age discrimination is common. And I think one of the most startling studies that was done was by the Urban Institute that followed 20,000 people entering their 50s with stable employment over a period of several years, and found that 56% of them were pushed out or laid off because of age. Only 10% ever recouped financially. So we know that Workplace age discrimination is rampant. So if you yourself are someone age 50 and over, you are working with someone age 50 and over, the likelihood that they have experienced some form or will experience some form of workplace age discrimination is likely, and therefore a problem that's worth it for us to address. So the good news is that we know, as a result of the global campaign to end ageism and basically a 2-year survey of ageism across the world, that there are research-based strategies to combat ageism. And what the World Health Organization found, and it's available in their report, was 3 strategies actually are effective in ageism. One is educating all of ourselves, kind of like you're doing today, about ageism and implicit bias. Implicit bias being that bias that we all have, but we're not necessarily even aware of it. So we may act on things based on prejudice and stereotypes that we have in our head, while not consciously or intentionally trying to be ageist. We know, and I suspect some of you are part of the Encore Network's intergenerational affinity group, that intergenerational connection in education is a really powerful way. And then the final way is looking at law and policy. So these are kind of research-based ways to combat ageism. So where does reframing fit into this? So what I think is important is reframing aging is considered a narrative change strategy. Narrative change in and of itself will not end ageism, right? So we're going to talk about how changes we can make in our communications, but simply doing that is not going to end ageism in and of itself. It needs to be coupled with those other things: community education and organizing, working on public policy, doing advocacy, reaching across generations, and all of that kind of thing. But it is important, and it supports the other efforts. So we have some really profound examples in this country, in the United States, of narrative change for social change. One was marriage equality. So the marriage equality movement gained a lot of traction when they started explaining, and the acronym was love and love. So instead of arguing for rights and benefits, telling the stories of people, of families, telling the stories of couples, telling the stories of people that we know, and that helped shift the frame and dramatically shifted the number of people who supported marriage equality. Access to healthcare, the same thing. When people started talking about healthcare as a right, not a privilege, and that became a mantra, that helped kind of lead the movement to expanded access to healthcare. We know that the opioid crisis initially was viewed as a matter of individual addiction, but then more funding and more effort went into addressing it when people started realizing and talking about it really as a public health crisis. So we know that the principles of reframing are a really important complement to the other things that actually change circumstances, and in this case, what we want to do, end ageism. So fortunately for us, Frameworks Institute was commissioned by these leading aging organizations and some of the major grant makers in aging to conduct research. They have the messages that we're sharing have a huge sample size. They were tested with over 12,000 people across the United States, representing demographically representative age, race, gender, socioeconomic status, and political affiliation. The messages and the language that they mapped were proven to have these kind of results. They improved our own attitudes as older adults about ourselves aging. So again, moving away from those negative beliefs to those age-positive beliefs that we know have all those health benefits. We know that their messages ended up decreasing implicit bias against older adults. And importantly, it increased understanding of the need and support for public policies that would allow us all to thrive in place, things like age-friendly communities, for example. So we do have a path forward. So now I want to talk about why you. Okay, so hopefully you've got an understanding of why it's important to reframe aging. We want to end ageism, and we want to make sure that people can thrive at any age. So why you? One of the things that Frameworks found, and to me, it is the most compelling argument about why the Encore Network and the Encore movement is absolutely needed. Frameworks called it the building momentum metaphor, and they found that one of the most powerful storylines that actually shifted people's thinking away from that narrative of aging is all decline and deterioration was telling real life stories of people aged 50 and over who are doing things in community. And it goes, the way they describe the metaphor is like this: that for all of us, getting older is a dynamic process, right? It involves constant and continuous change. And I'd like all of you to think about, what is some lesson that you've learned maybe over the last 2 years, however painfully, something you know now that you didn't know 2 days ago. And imagine that building up over time, right? As we get older, we have built up that insight, experiences, etc. And these kind of experiences and insight can really add power and force to moving our workforce and communities forward. And so we need to do all that we can to support it and make the most of it. And that's why I hope you understand why I think that the Encore Network and the Encore movement, and all of you who are doing in any way career coaching, whatever it is for older people, why your work is so important. This message, the way we act and the way we encourage other people to act, is actually shown to shift people's attitude to a more positive attitude about aging and to decrease ageism. It also moves us away from the silver tsunami, right? So what's the silver tsunami? It's like, well, too many older people and they're going to bankrupt the economy and everything else. But instead, it moves people away from thinking, instead of a silver tsunami, really what we are building is this, with the aging of the population, is a reservoir of talent. How can we deploy this to benefit our communities? And finally, YU is one of the things that frameworks and other firms that work in the field of narrative change have found is this concept of a trusted messenger. So sometimes messengers are perceived as having too much self-interest, right? So if I, involved in changing the narrative, tell you, here's why you should fund ageism, you're going to say, well, of course you're telling me that, you run an anti-ageism initiative. But when trusted messengers are deployed, people who have trust, so you as a career coach, you running a lifelong learning program, whatever, if you are carrying this message forward, we know that trusted messengers, the message lands better. So I want you now to think, and we did this with changing the narrative. One of the things that we discovered were public libraries, and we did this partnership with Denver Public Library early on, and since then with other public libraries. We know that public libraries are a very trusted resource in most communities, and if a program is being delivered at a public library, it has that more credibility. So all of you in a way are trusted messengers, and so we're going to go ahead and launch a very quick poll. And what I want you to do is identify, who do you communicate with? Who might consider you as that trusted messenger of information? And what platforms do you have? So if I am fortunate, I'm going to go ahead and be able to launch this poll without launching Kelly's poll. And we're going to do this really quickly. And can someone nod? Do we see a poll on the screen? Yay. All right. So there are 2 questions to this. And the first, question 1, and these are all multiple choice, check all who apply. Who do you communicate with? Could be coworkers, professional colleagues, friends and families, etc., media, policymakers. And then what platforms do you use? Blog or website, maybe you teach classes, informal conversations, social media. Some of you, I know we have a number of podcasters involved with the Encore Network, others. So just go ahead, if I can ask you to just weigh in and put in, who do you talk to and how do you talk to them? All right, we'll do 30 more seconds. If you can go ahead, if you haven't had a chance to weigh in. I'm loving the diversity that we have here. and all the opportunities that we have to communicate. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So I think we can see that all of us have lots of opportunities, right? Over 3/4 of us are communicating with coworkers, friends and families, many with the general public, lots of people with older adults involved in our program. Some of you have students. We're communicating with funders, media, policymakers. And we've got such a diversity of platforms to communicate with: blogs, websites, classes, informal conversation, media interviews. So I want you, as we are going through kind of the rest of this, to think about how can you infuse learning about aging, educating people about ageism, but also some effective communications into all of these audiences and into the various platforms that you have. Okay. That poll won't go away. So I'm not seeing my screen, but outside of that, we're going to go ahead and talk about, okay, so let's talk about how we can lead the way. And these are, we're going to go through some quick kind of ABCs. And I apologize, I'm having difficulty getting this poll out of the way and therefore not. Kelly, I don't know if there is something that you can do about this.
Strangely, I don't see the poll.
Okay, I got rid of it.
Did you figure? Okay.
I figured it out. Yes, I won't allow a stereotype of older adults being digitally incompetent to get in my way. All right, let's talk about leading the way. ABCs, these are things that we can check in ourselves and potentially change. So the first thing we want to do is check our own attitudes, right? What do we think about ourselves aging? And what do we think about older adults? Do we ever allow those stereotypes to go? So let's say we are doing in one of the classes that I actually do is a class on Encore consulting. I had a 35-year consulting career. I like to teach other people how to consult. Do I start rolling my eyes if someone tells me, oh, I don't want to use Google Drive, or I don't want to use that sort of, accounting software, that kind of thing? I need to check myself. What am I thinking about other older adults and their attitudes? Is this something where I'm going to roll my eyes, or do I have an opportunity to educate people here? There are two great tools that we can use to start checking ourselves about our own attitudes. And again, these blue links here are live links that you can go to both of these. The first is the implicit association test. It's a very short online test off the Harvard University website, off Project Implicit, and it measures the extent to which we have bias against or in favor of older people or younger people. If you take the test and you discover that you are actually biased in favor of younger people, that will not be surprising. Over 77% of people who've taken the test are that. That's how extensive ageism is in our society. But it's important because what we know and the research tells us is simply understanding our own bias helps check it, right? The second, and this article was just released, and it's by Dr. Kate Medeiros, Dr. Suzanne Kunkel, and Lee Yu. And they created the Age Smart inventory. And so unlike a lot of other ageism scales out there that kind of measure the degree to which ageism exists in the public sphere or whatever, this really is something that measures our own beliefs and is really a great tool that you can use even in your own Encore programs for thinking about to what extent do we have biases, right, against ourselves. It's a great tool to start collaborative discussions, right, about how we feel. So starting with ourselves is important and checking our own attitudes. The second, the B, is really behavior. How can we be those role models for building momentum and encouraging others in our network to do so? So if you yourself on this call are a person, you would describe yourself as an older adult, how can you be that role model for showing that the experience and insight that you've gained over time actually can be of benefit to community? If you are teaching a class to Encore seekers. How can you encourage them to be those role models, to show up in the world that way? Excuse me. And I think that there are some very common things that we can do. We need to learn how to refute some of the common myths and stereotypes about aging and about older workers. So the fact that all of us are retired, we're not willing to learn, we're going to leave our jobs, we're taking jobs away from older people and cost too much. Now, ordinarily, I would go through and refute these myths and stereotypes right then and there. That's what we do in the Age-Friendly Workplace Initiative at Changing the Narrative. But I'm not, because Tim has a teaser for you at the end. The Encore Network is going to be releasing this amazing handbook, and you can read it yourself to learn how to refute all of these common myths and stereotypes. The second thing that we can do in our behavior is foster that intergenerational connection. We can reach out to others, whether it's in our workplace, in our communities, so that we don't become age segregated and we're only talking to ourselves. We know, and the research shows, intergenerational connection in education reduces that othering. It reduces us versus them. And that's something that any of us can do. We can simply look for someone of a different age and have coffee, start talking. Changing the Narrative also has some intergenerational conversation toolkits, and those can be a great starting point for convening a group of people. And we can all, and I want to shout out again the Encore Network. I am co-chair with Doug Dixon of the Advocacy Affinity Group. We can champion policy solutions that are going to improve the climate for older workers and intergenerational teams. We can argue for stronger workplace discrimination laws that close some of those loopholes that the courts have left open. We can argue for graduation date bills. So a handful of states have passed it. New York and Delaware, I believe, have passed graduation date bill. We have one that I'm working on currently with other partners in Colorado. And basically it would ban employers from asking age and graduation dates from those initial job applications so that older workers have a chance to go in and show what they can do. And we can champion in our own states and our own communities. Every state received large amounts of pandemic funding. A lot of that was dedicated to workforce. We can be out sitting at those tables championing that workforce funding should be used in part to upskill and reskill older adults. So the final part is our communications. What can we do to shift our own communications to reframe aging? We've already seen all of you communicate to one or more audiences, and all of you have various communication platforms. So how can we use those platforms to communicate that better story about aging? And how can we encourage those in our networks to do so? So there are some stories that we need to avoid, and these stories are very, very prevalent. And frameworks found that all of these particular stories are very counterproductive. There are super senior stories, and many organizations felt like telling the story of the super senior was going to be a very effective way to demonstrate the value of older people, right? Here's the person who's 85 and they're skydiving. In Colorado, the person would be 85 and hiking 14ers when they were not appearing on America's Top Model or starting schools in Nepal for poor children. But we want to avoid those stories because they trigger individualism, and they also they basically move people away from thinking that we need to create communities and policies and law that allow all older people to thrive. We want a silver tsunami. If you set yourself up a Google alert for silver tsunami, and I guarantee you will get Google alerts every single day, where some state, some community is declaring, we have a silver tsunami, we have a silver tsunami. Older people are not a demographic crisis, right? It is a demographic fact. We are living on, for the most part, longer and for the most part, healthier lives. We have declining birth rates. The talent of older adults is needed for our talent pipelines, for our workforce and our communities. It is not a demographic crisis unless we fail to act and fail to harvest, as Mark Friedman would say, fail to harvest that experience dividend. One of the things that frameworks found was comparing ageism to other isms, sexism, racism, was counterproductive, and it was counterproductive for two reasons. One, for people who have experienced sexism or racism, started thinking can't possibly be as bad as that. So that was, but the other is it led people to thinking of very narrow legal remedies. Problem at the workforce, just file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Instead of thinking more broadly, how can we have programs? How do we fund programs like Encore programs, like career coaching programs, workforce development programs that cater to older adults? And those are the kind of things that we need to champion. Since COVID, we have seen a resurgence of this weak, vulnerable, elderly narrative that somehow this is also called compassionate ageism, but it's kind of the idea that as we get older, we need to be protected. And so we need to make sure that nothing in our own communications feeds that. So even if we're talking about workplace age discrimination, it shouldn't be poor Kathy couldn't get a job. It could be Kathy has all of these talents and experience that she can contribute to the community if we don't allow workplace age discrimination to get in the way. We want to move away from those poor older people's stories. We want to talk about demographic change, and it's really important. This census chart, to me, every time we show it to employers, we show it anywhere. Demographic change requires innovation, new thinking. One of the things that frameworks found was when we appeal to people's spirit of ingenuity and innovation, we remind people that we are a country, a state, a city, a town known for its innovation, that it primes us to think about innovative solutions. Innovative solutions, for example, older workers as a solution to the talent pipeline, innovative solutions of new ways of funding Encore programs and that kind of thing. But it's a demographic imperative because we can see from this chart in 1960, pyramid looked like this, whole lot of younger people tapering up to a small number of older people. But in 2060, it looks like this. There were never going to be enough youngins, right, to fill the talent pipeline to address the community needs. So instead of looking at older people as poor older person in need of help, we need to position, because of demographic change, we've got this incredible talent that is ready to help our communities, our workforce, our economy. There are specific language recommendations that frameworks did, and you'll be getting all of these slides as well as our guidelines to age-inclusive communications. We don't want to describe older adults as being elderly, senior, and senior citizen. They tested those terms and found out those kind of reinforce all the negative stereotype. We want to use older adults or persons or descriptive language. When we are referring to older people, it's not they and them, it's us and we, right? The one thing we all have in common on this session right now, we're all aging. If we are fortunate, tomorrow morning, we're all going to wake up a day older, right? We don't want to talk about battling aging or anti-aging. We want to talk about aging as a normal dynamic process, and it offers a lot of opportunity for growth and contribution if we don't allow ageism to get in the way. And we don't want to talk about people should have made better choices. And we can be the leaders in this as the Encore movement. We want to improve social context and come up with creative solutions. When we're talking about ageism, it's really important to define ageism. That's why we have a definition at the beginning and how it works, because most people, frameworks found, are really not aware of ageism. And I've found this in my work to end ageism as well. And we don't want to compare ageism to other isms. We want to talk about it as a matter of justice. When we are talking about demographic change, let's get rid of that silver tsunami going off the demographic cliff. We are not a disaster, right? It's a terrible metaphor. We want to explain demographics, that people are living longer and mostly healthier lives. And let's use our ingenuity to re-envision what's possible. Let's create those age-friendly communities in which people of all ages can thrive. That's where we can lead. We can insert that in all of our messaging. So that's what the research shows. That's what I have. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put you in breakout rooms. And wait, we're not. And it's going to be a very short breakout room. But what we want are your ideas. And we are going to ask you to, and I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment. And I'm going to share instead a Jamboard, where you are going to put your ideas. And what you're going to do is put your ideas on what are things that we can do in our own work let me show you how this works. What are things that we can do Can you see this? A Jamboard?
Yes.
What are things that we can do in our own work? So you're just basically going to click, you're going to create little stickies, you're going to put ideas. Kelly is going to go ahead and put you in breakout rooms. And before you do, what I'm going to do is paste in the chat that link. So that any of you can now see what are steps we can take in our work to lead in reframing aging. So Kelly, you're going to go ahead and put people in breakouts. Is that right?
Yes, I'm opening them now.
Terrific. And this is going to be a very short breakout room. You're literally going to have 5 minutes. So just start generating some ideas in the breakout room, put them on the Jamboard about how you can, what are things that you can do to lead in reframing. Kelly, can you tell if everyone is back?
It looks like everyone is back.
Fantastic. Okay. I just want to share a few of these. Because of time, and I went a little bit long in the presentation, we may only have time for a couple of questions. We'll take a couple, but we'll, again, if you have any other questions you want to put in the chat, go ahead, and I promise you that I will respond to them and send them to Kelly in the accompanying email that she will send out. So these are some absolutely fabulous examples. We will also send out a PDF of this Jamboard, but there are a couple of that I want to call out in particular because they were things I didn't mention. Working on DEI principles within your organization, one of the things that we know is very often that age is not included in DEI policies. And so looking at your own policies within your organization and checking that. Whoever wrote catching self-deprecating comments. So this is something that I think we all have a tendency to do, and especially when we are in front of audiences of other older adults, you know, the ripple effect that it can have. We may just be saying, and this actually happened to me with an MC that I hired to MC an event that we were doing. And he just kept calling himself, oh yeah, I'm the old guy, so I'm not going to be able to do this. And I was like, no, now this is a man who's doing absolutely amazing things and is in so many ways a role model for building momentum in his 70s, but was doing those self-deprecating comments. And they may not mean anything to us, but they reinforce some of those negative stereotypes. And leading by example, that to me is the one thing that all of us can do. So thank you for sharing your amazing thoughts. I will go ahead and take, I guess I'll take 1 or 2 questions before I turn it over to Tim. Does anyone have a burning question right now? I'm looking, Doug, okay, one of the questions that comes up is how to best call out ageist comments. So one of the, and I think this is really challenging. I mean, one of the things that I think we all need to do, there can be a temptation to go, yo, you're being ageist, right? And we don't want to do that. Our point, we know that change doesn't occur that way. And if there are ways that we can gently educate people, one of the things that changing the narrative has done is develop a couple of, we call them speak up charts. And so I'm making a note to myself to send those speak up charts, and they're just illustrations. They're not comprehensive of every situation, but they're the kind of things where, you know, when people say certain things, we might ask questions. The approach can be to gently educate people. Those are, you know, some examples, and we'll send them up. Thank you. Don is indicating couldn't open the board, but is adding some things. So we'll make sure we go ahead and get those added. Tim, I am going to go ahead and turn it to you because you've got, I think, some exciting announcements about what's happening in May at the Encore Network, and which I actually think relates a great deal to what we've been talking about here.
It does indeed. Thanks very much, Janine. I'm going to share my screen very quickly. This is the place on the Encore Network website where you can go in and view this program that was coming up May 17th. Goes from 12 to 1 Eastern time. And the Age 50 Plus Employment Affinity Group has worked in a very dedicated way over the last months to put together an age-friendly employer guide. Now, we all know that some of the older stereotypes, dated stereotypes, are biased against older workers. The recent research on all of this refutes those stereotypes, and a lot of that communication has been put together into this guidebook that we'll be releasing and going through on May 17th. So we really encourage you to attend this so that you can participate in the great reveal here and gain access to that guidebook. Also, if you have interest in any of the affinity groups, those are open to Encore Network members, as well as the Slack channels that support those groups. So that's just a quick overview. Wanted to bring that to your attention. And that's all I have, Janine.
Okay, Tim, thanks so much. So if you can stop sharing your screen, I am going to share one more thing. Well, I thought I was, perhaps not. Never mind.
Also, please note that our program evaluation poll is up. So if you could answer that, that would be great.
So the other thing, and I feel like we have an incredible opportunity, May is Older Americans Month. Every May, federal government agency declares that May is Older Americans Month. And what we have liked to do at Changing the Narrative, and we partnered with the Encore Network before on this, is I call it hijacking Older Americans Month on social media and taking the messages and the theme and using it to advance the ideas that we want to advance. And so the opportunities that we have, and I'm hoping that many of you will want to participate. The theme this year is Aging Unbound. Aging Unbound. And the question that we are going to ask at Changing the Narrative is, what would it look like if aging was unbound by ageism? We are going to do a social media campaign that looks like this. And I need people to basically raise their hands and say that they're willing to do a 30-second video interview with me via Zoom. It'll be really painless. It's a great opportunity to catch up. And what we'll do is we're going to have a series of these little mini videos. The whole video will be no more than 45 seconds. It's going to be an opening slide. What would it look like if aging was unbound by ageism? There will be 30 seconds of you responding whatever it is that you want to say. And then we will have at the back of that, basically, let's end ageism. We'll have a Changing the Narrative logo, but we'll also have the logo or a link to whatever organization you're involved with that you want to promote or that kind of thing, a link back to your LinkedIn, whatever it is, because what we want to do is have the message out in as many places as possible. So that's part one. Part two is we want to loop into this, the Encore Network and this extraordinary age-friendly employer guide. As those of you who know me know that I've been on this age-friendly employer train since 2018. And what I love is that there is now getting traction and that the Encore Network and the Employment Affinity Group has created this amazing resource. So we're also going to do a series of social media postings that pull out quotes from this guide that refute some of the myths and stereotypes, that talk about the benefits of older workers, that talk about how employers can leverage and that kind of thing, that promote the guide. So if you are interested, there are two things you could do. You could, if you're interested in either one, you could go ahead and you could put your email in the chat right now, and I will get back to you. And basically, the film part is going to be really easy. I will send you a Zoom invite. We'll arrange some dates. I'll send you a Zoom invite. It's no more than 5 to 10 minutes of your time where I'll go over, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to do your answer. You can do a retake if you like. And then we've got a video editor lined up to basically put these into a series of videos that all of us can distribute to get the word out. The idea is we are creating a movement. We are creating a movement to end ageism. We are creating an encore movement. We're building an encore movement. And the more that all of us can get the message out on social media and share these kind of tools, the bigger the movement will come. So I hope that you will play with us during Older Americans Month. It is so lovely to see so many of you. And I think with that, I need to conclude. I don't know if there's a final word, Lee, from you or Tim. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. And you will see an email in a few days with a link to the recording of this session. Thanks again and have a great rest of your week.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Gracias.